What's up, everybody? Welcome to Comic Book Nation's The Pool List, the one-stop shop for all things comics, just like our flagship show is all things for pop culture. I am your host, Matt Aguilar, and with me, I have an amazing pair of writers here. Kofi Outlaw, my brother from another.
You blew our tagline.
Look, here's the thing. I said pop culture. It's geek culture. Leave me be. You didn't have to point it out. We could have just sailed right past it, but no.
Yeah, you gotta stay on brand.
You gotta say something. You know what? Here's the thing. I got the first part right, and that's all that matters. And then we have an amazing guest. First time. We've been doing a lot of the first time here on the Pool List, and it's awesome. I've been wanting to get Mark Duchamps on here for quite a minute because if you were in the gaming Slack channel, it does turn into comic talk quite a bit. How are you, buddy?
Quite a bit. I'm good. We got some cool stuff to talk about this week. I'm excited.
Yeah, very much. I have been wanting to talk some G.I. Joe. And so it felt like Mark was the perfect guest to have on. He's a big Joe fan. And plus, there's just been a lot going on that side of the universe. But we're not starting there. Twisty, throw a little twist there. We're going to start with Avengers Twilight, a kind of new Chip Zdarsky Marvel book that is, obviously set outside of regular continuity. It's kind of its own alternate universe, what if scenario thing. This says, obviously right now, Chip is, on a run. I feel like his Batman stuff has been fantastic. His Daredevil stuff before them was great. So I was just really excited for him to kind of jump back into the Marvel side of things with Avengers and see what he could do. Avengers Twilight does a good job for the type of setting the concept, setting the premise of what is this world, where do our heroes find themselves, and trying to kind of set it apart from other takes on this. A lot of the notable figures are in here. Ultron has a say in this, the Starks, things like that. But I found it original, a lot of the ways that they tweak those characters or the way they use legacy in this book, and where Cap finds himself in this world. I dug this, and I was just kind of wanting to start out with a question, I guess, of where do you feel like this sits? We've had a lot of great Marvel alternate world what if style events over the past few years. In fact, we had Age of Ultron not crazy long ago. It feels like whatever, but House of M, all these kinds of things. How do you feel Avengers Twilight is, starting out so far? Kofi, what you thinking?
Me, I'm a 90s comic kid, so the first thing that jumped to my mind was Earth X. If you guys remember kind of Earth X, it was Marvel's kind of answer to DC's Kingdom Come smash. Like when DC kind of had that whole Kingdom Come thing take off, then along came Marvel with Earth X. But I liked this more than I remember liking Earth X when I initially read, because I remember first issues a lot. And I liked this a whole lot better than I liked Earth X. This already feels like, and I don't mean to be melodramatic, I didn't really know until I started talking how much I was going to say, but this already feels like a kind of timeline I would play in, like a Marvel timeline I could revisit. I know we're just getting into this story now, but it already does the work in one issue of establishing, like you said, basically like what we just experienced with the Ultimate Spider-Man, weirdly enough. It's the characters we know, the cores we know, but tweaked into these actually well thought out and interesting new, circumstances. And so like here we get Steve Rogers, we get Old Man Steve, again, not a concept we haven't seen before, but a distinctly different from the get-go picture of who this old man is, what he's been through, and kind of what happened here. So to the credit of the creators, like I was saying, nothing here is new. This is not a reinvention of the wheel in any kind of way, but I think what a lot of comic creators who are doing it right, like Zdarsky, are nailing is how to create character and compelling story and really kind of give you some both comic-y arcs, but also character arcs. Like we were just going over this with Batman, right? Like there's a whole issue of Batman having this epic. There's been several Zdarsky issues of Batman just having epic chases in the last few issues, chasing after the Joker, trying to get away from a robot in the physical world. But on the internal, there's this whole like Batman literally battling Batman thing going on at the same time. And so he understands how to be comic-y, but also how to get these deep character dynamics at work. And that's what I feel like we see here. And it's an interesting composition. I mean, it's an interesting scene just to see Steve go for a walk in the park and run into old ass Luke Cage and old ass Matt Murdock, right? And like these things and what they're saying to each other is, and they do the opposite of what we were talking about in Ultimate Universe. There's enough mystery here. Like they're referencing things, but the dramatic irony of it is, what we know and don't know is kind of well plotted here. And so it hooks you. So I actually enjoyed this a lot more than I thought because I picked it up and I was like, oh boy, here we go. And now another Logan, old man Avengers, like basically the same thing I think, we've seen before. But I was pleasantly surprised by the depth of and kind of the interesting context that they create here.
Well, Mark, where do you sit on kind of the alternate timeline type of stories overall, and what did you think of this one?
It's really funny. I think Kofi kind of hit the nail on the head. One of Chip Zdarsky's greatest strengths at Marvel has been taking the familiar things that we've seen done before and really infusing them with what's going on in society today. I thought like his Daredevil, we saw that a lot with, where, I mean, we've done Daredevil in jail and we've done, things like Born Again so many times over 40 years, but Zdarsky made it all feel really fresh with, addressing issues with, the American prison system. And now here with Avengers Twilight, he's taking what we've already seen with a million times with Old Man Logan and the last Avengers story and stuff like that. And he's infusing what's happening in society and making it feel really fresh. And that's what I loved about this first issue. You know, there was a lot to say here. And I think the moment that stuck out the most to me was, old man Steve seeing the documentary about the Red Skull,
Yeah.
where they were trying to sell the Red Skull as somebody who was fighting against Hitler. And then, and like, technically that's true, but for his own nefarious agenda. And then Steve goes on TV to decry that this documentary was made, and the thing that gets spun out of it is, well, you don't want both sides to be heard. And it's such a fascinating look at how fascism grows. And I really walked away from this surprised, not because Chip isn't such a great writer, because
Right.
he is, and he always blows me away. But I was not expecting something as profound as we got, and I'm really interested now to read the rest of the miniseries.
Yeah. No, I think you can say the pleasantly surprised thing is across the board, because I was interested because it was Chip. I also have to give praise to Daniel Acuna. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, the
yeah.
artwork.
I've tended to be kind of like hit and miss on Acuna, but man, when he's on, like, wow, like this book
Absolutely.
from beginning to end is stunning, and it just does such a great job of capturing, older Steve Rogers. It's like all the wrinkles and the cracks and the face, like everything is just so like pronounced, and you just feel when his knee gives out, in a battle, like you feel that, like it just comes out of the page, and I felt so bad.
It's rare, but like sometimes there's like comic art that goes beyond just kind of the depiction of a certain heightened reality. It's like a lot of the thematics are like captured in the art. In this book,
Oh, you muted, buddy.
how'd I get muted? It's like they're trying to shut me down. It's like not every panel is not just depicting like a life or a dramatic situation, but you can see themes of the book and like the socio-political themes like at work in even just the scene of what we got. What is it called in this one? I've read too many comics this week in rapid succession to get ready.
H-Day? Is it H-Day? It's H-Day.
Because there's a D-Day in one book. There's an H-Day in one book. Like,
it was A-Day in the Avengers game. So
yeah. So there
are some ties, by the way. There are some similarities between those words a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, but H-Day, and like it's hard to out Infinity War, but there's a scene in this book if you know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but there's an iconic scene for a young actor in Infinity War that, you know, this book arguably even breaks your heart a little bit more with, you know, just trying the context. Because again, it takes something you think is so familiar, but it tweaks it. And in this universe, it's like Captain America learning this piece of information about another hero at like this, you know, critical moment. And it's like heartbreaking. And he's just like, you know, in his reaction to it. But the depth of that moment, it's just a flashback scene. But you see why, like, it's such a perfect scene that you see why Cap's so messed up these days and like what he's been through and like what he's seen. So yeah, it was good. And like, I was just looking back over the book, and I had, even until Mark had said it, I forgotten like the actual real socio-political kind of Frank Miller satire of it all with like, yeah, Cap and the whole whataboutism and all this kind of stuff that we're experiencing in society today. And just the early scenes of him trying to walk around the neighborhood and what this version of modern New York is. And the kids all have like their screens and their hollow crap and all this stuff. And he's just like truly old man Steve walking around. So again, I think we're going in circles, but like, yeah, I jumped into this book not expecting to get as much as I did. And now it's a whole ass world that I'm interested in. So
Yeah.
good job.
And also, I detest Jimmy.
Oh yeah.
with a passion. I'm very excited to see where that kind of line goes. But my word, like their whole, you know, Crossfire style interview thing and all that, I was just like, you know, you can see, again, ties back to those themes. But even later stuff that he does, I've just, man, that's a detestable character that comes from, again, I don't want to get into spoilers, but it comes from a, you know, an interesting tree, and it will have big effects moving forward. Any last notes on the book before we move?
But again, perfect, because when you think about who made that kid, you're like, yeah, yeah,
yeah. It makes total sense. Mm-hmm. It like totally lines up. It's just, it really does that whole what if thing that we talk about all the time of taking that, you know, that couple and going like, well, what if we went really like outside of the box with that character, but it still ties. It still feels genuine. You know what I mean? Very much so. All right. So let's move into the G.I. Joe universe. We haven't had a chance to talk a lot about G.I. Joe here. We have talked about the Energon world, though, with Transformers. We were big proponents of the first few issues of Transformers. Spoiler alert, it's still really good. But there's also the G.I. Joe being built up in Duke. And now Cobra Commander, both by I will hopefully I say friend of the show, Joshua Williamson. Cobra Commander really, if you read Duke, it very much plays off of the very small scene we saw in Transformers and kind of builds Duke's kind of trajectory from there. And for Cobra Commander, you know, the intent was to kind of do the same for this character, of really this character that is so iconic, and yet, you know, if you scratch too far beneath the surface, there's not a ton there. There's not a ton there, especially if you know, were just watching the cartoons and things like that. So for this, it's like, I really dug the style of let's make you understand why, number one, people follow this guy. You know, you either have to have a sense of loyalty or have a sense of fear. And I feel like they play up the fear side in this, and they show you how volatile and how lethal this person can be, and why someone like him would rise to power. And we're also really seeing the beginnings of, you know, what Cobra will become and be. And so I really dug this. I like that it's, you know, it's a little brutal in spots, but I think it was necessary for the character, and they probably could have even gone a little bit further if you wanted to push that, but and get away with it. I thought that was really good. So I was excited for this. I think they work best as a tandem. I think if you read Duke and then you immediately go into Cobra Commander, the parallels and contrasts that really work, which I did. I went ahead and reread Duke right before I read this, and then Duke number 2 comes out in, I think, next week or the week after. So as kind of this back and forth, and then also if you're reading Transformers, whoa, there's a big thing that I will not spoil in here, but there's a big question that Transformers fans have had, and you get some reveals here. So I think as this connected universe, it's really working. I dug this. But, you know, where do you Mark, as I know you're a big Joe fan as well, how did you come away with this? Are you liking the kind of direction this comic universe is taking so far?
I liked the first issue a lot. I'm going to say that right off the bat. What's really fascinating to me is GI Joe it's in a weird spot culturally. No one seems to know what to do with GI Joe, because the way that the toys are these days, it's just not. That's not really a thing, and there's not a lot of appetite for like military toys anymore. So that presents a lot of issues. So I was really fascinated to see how you launch a GI Joe comic in 2024, and they went in a direction I wasn't expecting. They're playing up the horror elements and some of the weirder elements. And full disclosure, I was born more towards the mid to late 80s, so my GI Joe is not the rah rah military GI Joe that a lot of other people grew up with. I grew up with weird GI Joe. I grew up with Eco Warriors and Ninja Force and Monster Hunters, and that element of GI Joe hasn't been touched on as much. Like my GI Joe era is kind of like the redheaded stepchild of, to borrow a phrase, of the brand. And now to kind of see some of those elements that haven't been touched on a lot over the last few decades, all of a sudden kind of being pushed to the forefront, I thought that was a really interesting approach. And I'm very, very curious to see where things go from here. I liked it. I loved the way it tied into Transformers. Without getting into spoiler territory, one of my very first ever cliffhanger comics as a kid was a GI Joe issue, and it harkened right back to that. And I was like, okay, all right, you got me. Like, that's cool. Let's go Joe. So
Tug at the nostalgia heartstrings. Kofi, I'm actually not clear where you stand on Joe. I don't know if we've ever really talked about outside of the movies and the crossover there, but where do you stand on that? What are you thinking about this issue in particular?
Well, first of all, I think a lot of people are sleeping on the Energon universe that's kind of shaping up in these Transformers and GI Joe comics. It's kind of a very fun and awesome recreation of both franchises in the modern era. And it is very much, as Mark said, leaning into the sci-fi horror of it all. As in, as if giant robots were on Earth, crushing humans, it'd be freaky. And if there was a terroristic organization with slightly supernatural scientific leanings, like that would also be kind of nuts. But I also grew up, like I said, I was an 80s baby early. So I think people kind of there's this revisionist history, as we're so kind of fond of these days. But G.I. Joe, the cartoon, was the beginning of weird G.I. Joe. That's where they took out, we didn't learn about military guns and stuff. We learned about pew pew lasers and, zipping back and forth and all kinds of vehicles. And by the time G.I. Joe, the animated movie, was released, and we've got our first look at Cobra La, Galabalos, and Pythona, and Nemesis Enforcer, and all this stuff, things had gotten pretty weird by that. People were getting spores on their face. That was pretty freaky stuff for us as kids. That was straight out of Ridley Scott. They were just dropping spores and people were getting lit up with those things. And so I like that I like that they're pulling those weirder elements, because Cobra La was such a weird veer. But I mean, so was G.I. Joe fighting an army of crack dealers for a 3-episode special, which was a thing. And people died of drugs. That was a real thing. So they were all over the place, really. It was from Cobra La to crack dealers, G.I. Joe. There was a lot to do in the world back then. But I like that they're kind of pulling all those elements together, because there is a very, the Transformers books have a very militaristic G.I. Joe. These have this Cobra Commander, like you said, it's Cobra La. It's all that weird stuff. And I like that they're leaning into him, which they never really did in the show as much. Instead of an arch villain, he's a scientist.
Yeah.
That's who he is. That's in every depiction of it. It gets lost, but it's we didn't really have that light bulb moment until Seth Rogen and them made the Ninja Turtles actual teenagers, right? And we were oh yeah, that's radically different. But no, he is a scientist. And so there's an early scene that you see on the screen now, this horror scene where he it's not a spoiler. Cobra Commander hurt somebody. Like,
Yeah.
but the way he does it and his mind state is very much in keeping. Like, Williamson really understands who this character was. Like, he's a mad scientist. And like, that's what makes him dangerous. He is like a weird ass Mr. Sinister, just kind of walking through things and can vaporize or just murder people with some weird machine he has in his pocket. Like, that's who he is. And kind of seeing that and seeing the buildup of him getting like why he's disfigured and all that, why he later comes to hate people like lackeys and stuff like that because of like having idiot lackeys, which is a comedic thing that felt like right out of the cartoon.
Yeah.
Where he's just like, oh, should I throw this one? He's like, you
That was
fool!
so good.
He's like, ah.
Because it's a horrible, like, tragic thing for him. You know what I mean? Like, almost killing him, and yet it's played so perfectly there. I dug that movie.
Yeah, it's
so
like
much.
a straight callback to the cartoon. Like, that's always what happened. Is Cobra Commander would have like his lackeys were just really crappy. Like, good help was hard to find, and he was often just sent, running. But there was also like a lot of in jokes. Like, there's a whole they tell you this is going to be different because one of the biggest things in the cartoons was Cobra Commander screaming retreat and like all of them running away. And this book's like, nah, none of that. We're going a little scarier and edgier. No, there is no retreat. Like, nobody's retreating. Like, we're getting out there. So I think I say all that to say from my excitement, people are really sleeping on this Energon universe because it hits perfectly, in my opinion, for people like me who grew up with these things but are now adults. And so this is a more my adult mind looking at G.I. Joe and Transformers and being like, yeah, I like the edge because that makes more sense and it's interesting to me. So I'm digging this, and I just hope the movies do this stuff half as well as these comic creators are doing well, which never happens, but I'm gonna hope anyway.
It's funny, before we move to the next book, in the letters section of this issue, Williamson actually mentions G.I. Joe the movie, like directly pulling from, it's kind of the same thing of like, I was a really big fan of those things. That it's so funny how things come around, and there's always that next generation of fan that their stuff was looked at as the downturn of a franchise and then ends up being super popular again because now they're all older and can buy all that stuff. Like, it comes around every time in every single franchise. I mean, look what's happening over in Transformers, right? With Beast Wars. Like, I'm that generation of fan that always adored them. And at the time, there was a big fan base, but then people were also hardcore G1 Transformers fans. Well, that's not my Transformers, and I don't want animals. Like, what the heck? Except for dinosaurs, that's fine. But I don't want other animals. And so it's like,
not monkey was like the catchphrase.
Yeah. It's hilarious how that stuff always comes back. I know Mark didn't get a chance to read this one because I didn't tell him to, really, so it's not his fault. I just want to make that clear. But Superman number 10 is an issue that me and Kofi have been, both big fans of the series, but also been eagerly awaiting because Marilyn Moonlight is a big part of this issue, and also it's like straight up Wild West. It plays right into all that. I adore the series so much. I'm running out of ways to say like how much I love this series, but Bruno's artwork, it's hard to follow Jamal Campbell, but I will say like they've had some stellar interior artists kind of pick up the baton and run with it. And man, like Bruno's stuff, it was just made for the old West. Superman with a poncho, like making Terra Man an actual character as opposed to just some kind of throwaway villain. So fun. I just love this. And we get some real answers. We get an origin story and things. So I really dug this. Kofi, what'd you think?
Man, it is like, kudos to Joshua Williamson for jumping in and taking on the plot of Back to the Future 3, which is the most hated of all Back to the Futures. But like, this is basically what this issue is Back to the Future 3. And I was nervous because I wrote up like the spoiler that like we had this twist ending of the last issue where Superman got hit with this yellow kryptonite and sent to the Old West and then suddenly showed up as this kind of outlaw figure on this train heist. And so I was like, oh boy, because we were cooking with like just modern Metropolis, its secrets, everything that's happening there, Dr. Farm and Graph and everything and all the drama that's happening there. So when we took this detour, I was like, for how long and how crazy is this going to get? But like, man, Williamson's still plotting it perfectly. Like, we spend just one issue doing this. It's a fun and like issue. Turns out to have a lot of purpose in it. Like, we actually go to the Old West, but there's something that's accomplished. Like we get these major, like I said, time travel things. And like this book does it so well where you're mixing Old West adventure, kind of an ongoing story, plus time travel mechanics, and none of it feels heady. There's not like one long page where I was like, like
there was no cosmic treadmill.
No, or just slogging through exposition. There's all kinds of callbacks in this. Like, but I never saw any of Superman's time travel adventures where he ran into Terra Man. I've never read those issues. But I got it. I got that it happened because they quickly established like, oh, I recognize this guy. He's also time traveling. Like, I know he's messing around. I know. And then they have like just a showdown, and you can tell like, and it's all still Superman. There's never a point in this books ever where Superman doesn't feel like Superman in everything he does. And so, like you said, you also get this little aside that's not even highlighted as a major part of the book. It's literally just background stuff in the panels until the very end where it pulls together and you're like, oh, this was also an origin story. And the origin of this character is time travel based, and that's even crazier. But it also just instantly elevates Marilyn Moonlight, who we like because she was cool, now has like a badass character underpinning. And we're like, oh man, this chick is like really badass. So that's pretty cool. So, I mean, we are just... everything we've done to widen out this character and his world is interesting and fun. And the fact that it's happening while Action Comics is still bursting at the seams with all kinds of stuff too is like, yeah, Superman's back, baby. And again, people need to wake up to that.
Yeah. Now, and very much Marilyn is giving me Ghostmaker vibes of like how taken I was at that character after we started to really learn about the character, and it was more than just a cool design. And now I love that everything about that character is cool now. And so Marilyn is very much in that same thing. All right, I know we got to bounce, so let's get to Wreck Our Paths. Let me start with Avengers Twilight. Kofi, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Thumbs up.
Mark, thumbs up, thumbs down for Avengers Twilight #1? All right.
Big thumbs up.
And then for me, yeah, thumbs up across the board. This surprised me. I feel like it surprised all of us, and in the best way possible. Moving to Cobra Commander. Mark, let's start with you. Thumbs up, thumbs down on this one?
Yeah, thumbs up. Not as big as Avengers Twilight, but definitely up.
Kofi?
Thumbs up, but also the caveat for my Joe fans, like, this is for you.
And for me, yes, very much. For all the reasons we stated before, thumbs up for me. You should definitely give this a read. Kofi, I feel like I don't even need to say this one, but Superman #10, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Oh, thumbs up. We can keep it pushing.
Yeah, thumbs up for me as well. Before we bounce, let's do a real quick comic recommendation of the week. I will start with, hey, spoiler, Superman #10 is really good. You should read it. So that's me. Kofi, what about you?
I have The Invincible Iron Man #14. I'm surprised about how they continue to weave Iron Man into the X-Men universe. Never saw that coming, but Duggan and them are cooking over there, and some pretty hot things happen in this book, so check it out. And we keep building up to a new Iron Man armor that is going to be a highlight, so yeah.
Yeah, that armor looks sick. Mark, what is your recommendation of the week?
Yeah, sticking with Avengers Twilight. Blew me away. I'm a longtime Avengers reader. I've been reading since the Busiek Perez days, and yeah, just walked away really impressed with this.
Well, guys, we have covered as many comics as we can fit into 30 minutes. Of course, you can check out more coverage of all the comics we read and review on Comicbook.com. Also, as a quick note, we did not forget about the new issue of Wonder Woman, but we will be covering that on Friday. So hopefully join us there. Janelle is super pumped to be in that conversation as well. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you for listening to the show. And until next time, peace.
Peace.